Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I'm joined, as always, by Jon Kelly. We're going to be talking a little bit about UFC 264 Fallout to start the show today. But after that, we will obviously get into the UFC Vegas 31 card. We have an 11-fight slate headlined by Islam Makhachev versus Thiago Moises this weekend. John, my friend, last week was not kind to either one of us. I think we're both excited to bounce back. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I know we ran into some technical difficulties this evening, but other than that, we're good to go. You know, real quick, just on last week, last week was a bloodbath. Not going to beat around the bush, but I honestly don't feel bad about my Conor bets. Like, if you give me plus 500 for Conor McGregor, notoriously one of the best knockout artists, plus 500 in almost any matchup, I'm probably going to take a stab at it. So I don't really regret it there. But I will say it's it's getting super tough to even try to defend Conor at this point. Like, that was just embarrassing on all counts. Like, he's obviously always been talking shit or whatever. And that's fun. And that's a reason why a lot of people like him. But when you take it to like a whole new level, when you start talking about people's family and stuff like that, that's just not cool. And then even after he loses, like, he's screaming about his wife in the cage. Like, it was honestly just embarrassing. I was embarrassed for him at that point. So it was just, it is what it is. I'm just kind of over that fight. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see it again, and we'll see if it plays out any differently. But yeah, like you said, excited to bounce back this week. The star quality of this card isn't as good, but these lower level cards are usually where we can make a decent buck or two in a couple of spots. So curious to hear your thoughts on a couple of these matchups.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, I actually won on the main event last week. I played the under 2.5, but all around, I think it was my worst card I've ever had betting MMA. A large portion of that could have been avoided with an earlier stoppage in the Moutinho O'Malley fight, or really just Moutinho falling down and staying down. I mean, I was holding some like O'Malley submission in round 1, 27-1. It was just one of those nights where like he dropped him, was close to locking up a sub towards the end of round 1, ran out of time, and then of course it almost goes the distance. So it was a brutal night. I was kind of a bad beat, but I made some bad bets in general. But you mentioned it, not a great card this week in terms of the actual skill level. Like, this is not one where I'm inviting all my buddies over like I was last weekend to watch the fights. But sometimes those present the opportunities with the most amount of money to be made. So, John, without further ado, we only have 11 fights this week, so I anticipate we'll be a little quicker than normal. That changes things for DFS. Obviously, there's a smaller player pool of only 22 fighters. So everyone is higher owned across the board. You need to make different decisions. When we have a big card like that, you can kind of spread your ownership. Like last week, we had a big card. Next week, I think there's 15 fights scheduled, and I'm sure some will fall off, as most do these days. But with 11 fights, what I personally like to do is I like to get my core in DFS a little bit tighter, really hone in on my favorite plays of the slate and not diversify as much. That way, if the things that I feel most strongly and most confidently about come through, I have a significant amount of my personal equity tied in those results. And hopefully one of them comes through and, hits the nuts at some point. So 11 fights. That started off in the heavyweight division. We got Rodrigo Nascimento. He's minus 315, $9,000 on DraftKings against Alan Boudreaux, who comes back plus 275, 7.2K. John, I was pretty adamant before Boudreaux's UFC debut against Tom Aspinall that like this guy just is not UFC level. He's undersized for the weight class at heavyweight. He does not have great hands, and he's a pretty horrific grappler. And I mean, even if you go through his kind of results, he has some wins that are now like a DQ that turns into a win the way they do it in Canada under their commission, where his opponent tested positive for a banned substance, and then Boudreaux gets the win after, but he really lost the fight when you go back and like watch the tape. He's just someone I've not been impressed with. And on the other side, like Nascimento lost in under a minute against Christakis his last time out. I cashed on him in his UFC debut against Dontel Mays. He's a pretty decent grappler for heavyweight. I think maybe he's fragile. Maybe it's just heavyweight variance, him getting knocked out in his last fight. I think he's a way better fighter than Boudreaux. It's not the thing where I'm going to lay minus 315. I'll let you talk about the props here in a second, but I haven't played anything myself. But in terms of betting, I think anything regarding Nascimento round 1 or Nascimento submission, I mean, there's a massive gap between these two guys, especially when the fight hits the floor. And I expect it to get there relatively early in the fight. So it's a pass for me at this point, but I'm kind of curious how you're attacking the fight from a prop perspective and then maybe a DFS perspective as well.
Yeah, I played Nascimento by submission at plus 100 just because, I tend to agree with you. Badeau, I like to call him Bidet because he's shit at fighting. But yeah, I just think if this fight hits the mat, Nascimento just cuts right through him like a hot knife through butter. Like I don't even think it's competitive. And the thing that I like about Nascimento is he's always aggressive at getting the fight to the ground. So he's actually got a decent skill set in terms of low level heavyweight. But he trains out a good gym, American Top Team. He looks to wrestle, decent submission grappler, and we've seen it in multiple fights. And so I guess if he keeps the fight standing and Badeau lands something heavy, maybe he can knock him out and hurt him. It is heavyweight, but I just don't see, especially coming off a knockout loss, I don't think he's going to take long to get this fight to the ground. That's typically his game plan anyway, and it's a clear leak on the Badeau side. So I think Nascimento takes me down early. I think he submits him. The only reason I didn't play by first round submission is because the number wasn't even that much better. And there is a chance, maybe he makes it to the second round and gets submitted then. So I was fine with just playing the submission prop at plus 100 for a unit over on FanDuel. And that's still available on FanDuel as well.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's the way to attack this fight. In terms of DFS, I do think that Nascimento has upside for a takedown, a little bit of top control, and then that 90-point first round bonus. The only issue I have is that there are a lot of fighters on this slate. It's very top heavy. In the last few weeks, we've seen these fights where there's a lot of closely lined fights, and we have guys at minus 150 who are 9K, and we have fighters who are plus 110 and 7K, and we've seen that kind of consistently. This card is not like that. We have several favorites that are larger than 3-1, and we'll discuss all of them throughout the show. But with Nascimento, it's one of those things where, like a second round finish, he's not going to be optimal. And we can say that now because we know we have a minus 700 fighter in the main event who has a 5-round floor in the Islam Makhachev. We know that we have a fighter, Francisco Figueiredo, who we'll talk about in our second fight. I know you're not a fan of him this week, John, but he has all the upside in the world as well. And then we even further down the card, we have wrestlers like Matisse Gamrot. I just think there will be high scores towards the top this weekend. So if you're playing Nascimento, which I will certainly have my shares of, we're going to need him to get that finish in round 1, or else he's probably drawing pretty thin to make the optimal, as long as 2 big underdogs don't win or something like that. But that's enough time on our first fight. Let's move on to our second fight of the night. And we have the previously mentioned Francisco Figueiredo, minus 330, pretty prohibitive number in terms of betting him on the money line, in my opinion. $8,900 against Malcolm Gordon, who comes back plus 270, 7.3K. And Malcolm Gordon's a guy who I've made it pretty clear throughout his UFC run. I don't think this guy is great. He came over from the TKO promotion in Canada as well. Has not made it out of the first round in his first 2 UFC fights. Has been finished twice. Kind of surprised he got a third shot in the UFC. But I checked the FTN Bets tracker, John, and it looks like you're giving him a pretty decent shot to get his first win this weekend. He's a plus 270 underdog. Your Discord avatar magically changed to Malcolm Gordon this week. So there's clearly some love from you towards Malcolm Gordon. Talk to me about your play in this fight and kind of how you see it playing out.
Yeah, it's pretty funny that I'm backing my guy Malcolm X because I've been like the biggest Gordon hater. I know you have as well, but we've talked about it in the past. I bet Albazi against Gordon in his UFC debut. I bet Sue Madarshi by knockout against Malcolm Gordon. But those ones were just kind of more obvious to me, I think. Like the biggest thing with Gordon is like his skill set wise, he's not terrible. It's just he's extremely fragile. The dude cannot take a punch. Like as soon as he eats a big shot, he shells up. He just sort of, fades away and just covers up and gets out of there. So, and he's been knocked out like 4 times in his career, been dropped multiple times as well. Like the dude cannot take a punch whatsoever. The thing is like skill set wise, I actually think he's a better fighter than Figueiredo. Like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think Figueiredo is a worse version of his brother, but like a lot worse. Like his brother has a style that I don't even think is that great in terms of his pure like MMA skill set. I just think he's been carried by his athleticism and pure power. And I think Figueiredo basically has the same skill set without the athleticism and power. So I don't think either of these guys is super good at MMA.
Yeah, I mean, obviously his brother is like light years better than him. Like Figueiredo, I guess he's an okay wrestler. Like he'll land takedowns, but like even his takedowns, a lot of it is like, basic trips and sweeps. Like it's not like he's a technical wrestler by any means. So on the feet, he's going to spam leg kicks a little bit, doesn't even really throw a lot of punches. And like you said, doesn't have the power behind those punches. At least we haven't really seen it, right? Like he does have a couple knockouts over in Jungle Fight. They're back years ago against super, super low level guys. It doesn't mean he can't knock out Malcolm Gordon, but the threat of the knockout is much, much lower than a guy like Sumadarje, the Chinese Connor, like a guy like Amir Albazi, who looked really good and just really beat the brakes off him in the first round and then submitted him. So it's like skill set wise, I actually think I like more from Gordon than I do Figueiredo. And yes, it's possible Figueiredo maybe takes him down and banks some control time here, but Gordon's actually a good enough grappler. He is a black belt. He can throw up submissions off his back. He's got a couple submissions off his back. He did reverse Albazi, got stuck in a triangle, but he did have a nice reversal against Albazi. Like I don't think he's bad if it goes to the ground. But I also, on the feet, just favor him to do a lot more. He's much more active. He's going to be throwing more volume. I think he has a chance to finish Figueiredo, too, just like his brother in terms of the cardio, except worse. Like Figueiredo, Davison's Figueiredo, the cardio is a concern. It's not like a huge liability. For Francisco Figueiredo, I would say it is a pretty big liability. Like even in that Jerome Rivera fight, who's a certified bum, I think we all know that at this point. He almost finished him in round 3. Like Figueiredo was like holding on for dear life because his cardio is just not there. So if the fight does get that long, I would favor Malcolm Gordon. I know a lot of people don't think it does get that far because Gordon is so fragile. So it's just like one of those things where I just need him to avoid getting killed early. And I think he wins this fight. And if you're going to give me plus 250 on it, I'm going to look to attack that spot, and I'm going to do it in a big way. So I played him for 1.25 units at plus 240, I believe. I think you get a little bit better number if you shop around a little bit, but yeah, give me Malcolm X. He's my underdog play of the week. I think he's one of the better money line spots. And in terms of DraftKings, there's a lot of sketchy underdogs. We're going to have to take a shot on somebody. I think Gordon has a pretty decent chance here.
Yeah, and I like that breakdown, and I think you make a lot of good points. One thing I want to mention is you go back and look at Gordon's regional tape. I knew that he was going to be a fragile fighter because we mentioned he's gotten knocked down once in the UFC. He's still been knocked out 4 times in his career. He has just never been able to take a punch. With some guys, I think that kind of narrative is overshadowed, like Cody Garbrandt comes to mind. I just think Cody Garbrandt has shit defense and puts his hands down and wades into the pocket and looks to brawl with people. I think Malcolm Gordon really does not like getting punched in the face, which is just not a great quality for a professional fighter to have. But I also think, against Amir Albazi, he gets submitted in round 1. Sumu Derji, who carries a lot of power in the early rounds, knocked him out in round 1. I think he's there's 2 narratives. There's one where it's, that he's fought this high level of competition, so of course he's lost to those 2 guys. And then there's one where he's just always been fragile, and I think I fall somewhere in the middle. Like, yeah, Sumu Derji is a powerful guy, but at the same time, I just don't think Malcolm Gordon is taking punches from many guys. But at the same time, I mean, Francisco Figueiredo, he might be one of the worst fighters we've seen at minus 300 in a UFC fight. I mean, the guy is just, in terms of his skill, he's just not skilled. In terms of his durability, he has a big advantage here. I do think that's something interesting. In this fight, you mentioned Figueiredo looks to kick the legs, he'll land takedowns. I think the way you beat Malcolm Gordon is you just overwhelm him and punch him in the face because he doesn't like it. And I think Figueiredo might look to wrestle instead at some points, and that's going to lead to some scrambles. So what I'm doing here is I played the under 2.5 rounds at minus 142 because I still do think that Figueiredo KO is much more live than you seem to think. I don't know if it's going to take much to get Gordon out of there. But if he takes him down, Malcolm Gordon has an extremely active guard. and whether or not he submits Figueiredo. We saw this in the Albazi fight where he got submitted himself, Gordon did, because of the scrambling sequences in that fight. So I think on the feet, Figueiredo has a chance to win by KO. And if they're scrambling on the ground, I think both guys have a chance. So in terms of DFS, I do think Malcolm Gordon, unfortunately, is one of the better underdog plays of the week. I just think in a win, he has more upside than some of these other guys around that price tag. So I'm not betting him straight. There's probably value on him. I just prefer to take the under because it covers the volatility of him hating being punched and also kind of the upside of him being able to make this a fight in certain facets of the game. But at the same time, I'm paying minus 142. You're getting plus 245 or whatever you said on Gordon. So just two different ways to attack the fight. I think we both think that Figueiredo is not nearly as good as this price tag would indicate on the money line. I just prefer to attack it from a props perspective. Do you have anything to add there? We have 11 fights, so we can kind of go in depth on some of these points that you feel super confident about. So, John, if there's anything else you want to add here, or we can just move on to the third fight.
No, just in terms of DFS, like we sort of both hit on it, is like this is with only 11 fights, like ownership's going to be super concentrated. And a lot of these favorites, like we think they're probably going to win. Like we have some massive favorites, not just the main event, but Amanda Lemos, who we'll get to later. We have a multiple, like there's 5 fights of people minus 300 or higher. So this is not a very dog heavy card. So when we talk about Gordon being one of the better underdogs, it's like our choices are just so limited. And if we see a path for any of these underdogs, then that makes, you can make a case for them. So I think this week in terms of DFS strategy is really just about, rotating your core of expensive fighters who we like Nascimento, Makhachev, Lemos, like other people that we'll get to later, and then just rotating in the underdogs that you feel comfortable taking a shot on, like Gordon. Even Badeau, who we both think is a pretty terrible play. He is a heavyweight. He's going up against a guy who's going to be super popular. Getting that sort of leverage, even though it maybe only happens like 5 to 10% of the time, you're going to get so much leverage against the field, especially in the big, large field GPPs, that those are the type of builds that I would look to have come Saturday.
Yeah, it certainly feels like a stars and scrubs sort of lineup. When we're making a DFS lineup, we're essentially parlaying 6 guys together. I would rather not be parlaying these, minus 150 favorites, these plus 120 underdogs. Like, just give me the big favorites and then mix it in underdog and get the right underdog that wins. And I think Malcolm Gordon has a shot. Am I picking him? No. Do I think he's terrible? Yes. But I do think that there's a chance that he goes out there and makes this a competitive fight, especially on the ground, which we know can lead to high upside under the current DraftKings scoring. So let's move on to our third fight. I don't have a ton here. We have Miles Johns minus 170, $8.4 thousand on DK against Anderson Dos Santos, plus 145, 7.8K. I think this is an interesting fight. I think it might be an entertaining one as a fan. We know what Miles Johns brings. He's a hard-hitting wrestler, kind of turn striker, kind of your typical like wrestle boxer. Like he has a strong wrestling base, but he kind of likes using his hands. He's powerful in both facets. He gasses out towards the back end of fights. He is just kind of a very easy fighter to categorize in that sense. And then on the other hand, we have Anderson Dos Santos, who he's 1-2 in the UFC, but he has shown the ability to be extremely dangerous, specifically in the submission game. I mean, his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a high level. It is a very opportunistic BJJ game he plays. He will pull guillotine. He will hurt guys and then go to pull a guillotine, but his chokes are extremely dangerous. So it's one of those situations where I don't think Johns is a great fighter, but he clearly has the minute-winning upside in this fight, in my opinion. But at the same time, he's fighting someone extremely dangerous, and he's going to have his neck out there for submissions and guillotines on takedown entry. So I think Dos Santos has a chance to pull off the upset here. I just don't really see a way that he wins that it isn't like some sort of opportunistic finish. And at plus 145, I'm not getting quite big enough of a number to do so. However, in DFS, I think the upside lies with Dos Santos in the form of, he could, lock up a submission out of nowhere in round 1. So I think Johns is the better fighter for sure. I think he deserves to be a favorite. Is minus 170, minus 185 a little bit steep? Probably, but not to the point where I'm looking to make an investment on either side quite yet. So pass for me in the betting market. I do like the underdog a little bit for DFS purposes. What do you got for me here, John?
Yeah, I think that was a really good breakdown. I agree with pretty much everything that you said there. I considered playing Dos Santos coming into the week. I ended up passing. I guess I'm still kind of back and forth on it because, like you said, I do think minus 185 is wide on Johns. Johns is a guy that we do have some concerns about. You mentioned the wrestling. I think he wrestled D2 in college. We saw in Dana White Contender Series landed like 5 takedowns against Richie Santiago. But since coming into the UFC, like he just has fallen in love with his hands, and he does have a really good jab for this division, but that's about it on the feet. So it's like, and then his cardio hasn't looked great either. So if he's a wrestler with a decent jab who doesn't look to wrestle and has questionable cardio, like there are definitely concerns with him at minus 185 price tag. But on the flip side, you mentioned the concerns about Dos Santos. I think it probably has to be a finish here just because he's not a great round winner. Like you said, like maybe he could take the back here and steal a round and then maybe land a knockdown or something. Like he does have some power just because he's usually threatening the takedowns. And then he'll like wing a big overhand or something like that. So maybe once Johns gets tired, maybe he can drop him or something. But I think if you're attacking the underdog here, I think you go for the submission prop more than likely. And in terms of DraftKings, you hit on it. I think he clearly has more upside than Johns just because we can't rely on Johns to wrestle here. And I don't think we can't rely on Johns to wrestle in general. I think he's only landed 1 takedown in like, 2 or 3 UFC fights now. But I don't think that's going to be his game plan here against a guy who is a legitimate submission grappler. So I think we see him just try to point fight, box, stay on the outside, and win a decision here. But there's definitely concerns at the current price tag. I have more interest on the underdog in terms of DraftKings, but no bet for me either way.
Yeah, and maybe we're underselling Johns' finishing ability. I mean, he had the nice KO. I mean, really, he was cheating pretty heavily in the Natividad KO. I mean, his hands were like fully inside the glove, pulling his opponent in who wasn't able to defend. But I mean, Johns is small, but certainly carries power in his hands. And Dos Santos is actually smaller than Johns. So maybe we're overlooking the Johns finishing potential a little bit. I mean, he's a favorite in terms of the scorecards equals no action market, which means like your bet only pays out if there's a finish. So I think maybe we're underselling that Johns KO upside a little bit here. But in terms of DFS, like fighters cost money and we want to pay for all these fighters at the top. A $600 discount feels pretty big on this week's slate to me in the mid-range. So I do think Dos Santos has a chance. And you mentioned he isn't a great round winner. He could get the back to win a round. I think if he gets the back, he's going to get a submission. And Johns has been controlled. I mean, the Cole Smith fight, he gave his back twice in that fight, I believe. I mean, and it's not impossible to get into dominant positions. So when I say that Dos Santos is finish reliant, it isn't like he needs to pull a submission out of his ass. He just typically is very opportunistic, gets a back take. I think he's going to need to find a sub there, or else he's not going to win 2 out of the 3 rounds. So I think this is a fun fight. I think Johns probably edges it, and he's just a more well-rounded minute winner. But at the same time, Dos Santos brings a lot of weapons into the fight that could expose someone like Johns, who's kind of power reliant and tends to slow down later on in fights. So let's move on to our 4th fight of the evening here. We got Khalid Taha returning to the cage. He's minus 135, $8.3 thousand on DraftKings against Sergey Morozov, who's plus 115, 7.9K. John, I'm going to let you go first on this fight because I know you have a bet on it that you are, and it's an anticipated bout in terms of your betting card this weekend. So go first here, Taha versus Morozov.
Yeah, first off, I played Taha by knockout at plus 500. This is one that, and I put this in the bet tracker as well. I've been chasing this Taha knockout prop like it feels like forever. Ever since he's come to the UFC, like he's just a super powerful dude. And I know he used to be on steroids. Maybe he still is, who knows? But regardless, he's just like a super powerful, explosive striker. Like 9 of his wins have come by knockout. That's clearly his path to victory. And while the fight plays out on the feet, he carries some massive power. He turns almost all of his opponents into wrestlers rather quickly because once they feel that power, they want to take him down. They want to take some power out of his arms. They want to expose his cardio a little bit, which he actually does have really good cardio. It's just his defensive wrestling and grappling is not all that great. But I do think there's kind of a narrative here on Morozov that people are just like, oh, he's going to take him down and control him. And like, I wouldn't be so sure. I think that's kind of just like everybody kind of forcing that narrative because that's the way to beat Taha. But if you look at the guys that have done that to him, Ronnie Barcelos, like obviously he's going to do that to him. Very good fighter. I know he just lost it to Valaya, but good wrestler, great grappler. Obviously, he's going to take him down and control him. He was taken down multiple times by Bruno Silva, another good wrestler. He was taken down 6 times by Nad Narimani. And I know Nad Narimani's not like very good at all, but he's not a bad wrestler. Like that doesn't surprise me at all. And he took that fight on short notice in his UFC debut. So I just don't think watching the tape on Morozov, it's not like he's this super aggressive wrestler anyway. Like I would say he most of the time prefers to be striking. So I actually think this fight plays out on the feet. I think both guys want to move forward. And this is finally a spot where Taha is getting an opponent that is going to be a willing dance partner in the striking realm. And I think that is crazy to me that we're getting plus 500 for him to win by knockout against a guy who's been knocked out before, who is going to move forward. They're going to meet in the middle until somebody drops. So give me the guy who's more powerful and I think more durable as well. So give me Khalid Taha by knockout. I think he has a lot of upside in the mid-range, but there is some risk. Obviously, without that early knockout, he's probably not going to score great, doesn't throw a ton of volume, not going to wrestle. So there is some risk here, but he's a decent high upside target in the mid-range.
Yeah, I think that's a good breakdown. I don't have a ton to add here. With Taha, we kind of know what we're getting. He's a tough guy. His losses mostly come when people hold him down. I think his get-up game is improving a bit against Barcelos. You mentioned he's taking down that fight, but he was only controlled for 3 or 4 minutes. He got up and wasn't like he was on his back for 10 minutes, which we've seen before against Nad Narimani. And I do think that Morozov might look to mix in the wrestling a little bit. You look back at his tape in M1, he does in mostly all his fights, but it's not to the point where I think he's going to have like a top control clinic here. I think Taha being a short favorite makes sense. He is the more physical guy. He hits harder. I think a KO pop is fine. Plus 500, you said you got on KO?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's
it's moved a little bit. Sorry to cut you off. It's moved a little since then. So if you're looking at FanDuel, it's plus 430, but I think there's still a little bit of value there as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, the guy cracks, and we saw, Morozov, I will say his strength of schedule is pretty strong. I mean, you look at this guy's last 3 losses so he's lost 3 times in the last 5 years. Umar Nurmagomedov in his UFC debut, and I think Umar's a pretty solid fighter. Mozar Evloev, I know, is a pretty solid fighter at the UFC level at this point. And then Josh Reddinghouse, who's currently on Tough. He also got that win back in his last fight before the UFC Morozov did. But those are like 3 probably UFC level fighters that he's lost to. And Khalid Taha is certainly a UFC level guy. I mean, I know he's I think he's 2-2 inside of the promotion. He has that win over Boston Salmon. He might be 1-3 at this point, actually, now that I think about it. But he's UFC level. He hits hard. He's durable. I think him being a small favorite makes sense. But Morozov is a decent fighter. I don't think that Taha is going to come in here and steamroll him. So short favorite for Taha, minus 135 makes sense. I do think he has upside in terms of DraftKings. It's just a matter of how often am I getting to the mid-range on this week's slate when I probably want to play 2 or 3 fighters above 8.5K. So that's my only thoughts on Taha. And for that reason, he might go overlooked, right? Like if everyone's looking to build stars and scrubs style lineups and you build a lineup that has Anderson Dos Santos and Khalid Taha and you're only paying up at 1 spot and you get to play 3 guys in the mid-range, that makes you different on a week where with 11 fights, there's sure to be a couple of lineups that are highly duped throughout those big field tournaments that we talk about. All right, let's move on to our second biggest favorite on the card. We have Amanda Lemos. She is minus 550, $9,300 on DraftKings against Montserrat Ruiz, who's plus 425, 6.9K for Ruiz. And it's interesting, on our ticker here, we have minus 550, and John actually made the ticker a few hours ago getting prepped for the show. Lemos's price is blown up. She's almost minus 700. Not even almost. She's minus 700 in some places at this point. I saw minus 650 out there. There was certainly some love this afternoon. We're recording on Friday afternoon for Lemos. I don't know if I'm laying that sort of price on a girl like Amanda Lemos, but look, the breakdown here for me is pretty simple. I play Lemos to win inside the distance, plus 130. It's on Fox Bet. It's listed under odds boost, and I normally don't post odds boost because I just I want to post stuff that is everyone could bet. But the limits are like $1,000. So I figure if I'm betting a unit on that, that's fine to give out. Oftentimes the odd boosts are like $25, $50. So I don't want to post that type of stuff, but I could get down a significant amount of money on Lemos to win in between rounds 1 and round 3. She's just a way more physical and strong and more powerful woman than Ruiz. Amanda Lemos, she came into the UFC. There's that Leslie Smith fight where she gassed out, she got finished, but then she came back 2 weight classes lower and has looked like an absolute killer since then. She went in there against Souza in her last fight. And Lavina Souza is not a good striker by any stretch, but she had a solid Invicta run. She's a good fighter. And Lemos, she dominated her physically, like to the point that I wasn't expecting. Souza looked like she was completely overwhelmed. Lemos hits hard. She's a good offensive grappler. And Ruiz is really a one-trick pony, right? We saw it against Cheyenne Buys, who props to Ruiz. She came in, got that win. There's some beef between the two of them in her debut. Big underdog upset. But she has one move, and it's the head and arm throw. And if she can't get it on Lemos, I think she's going to get knocked out on the feet. And if she goes for it, that move is very easy to take someone's back when they're trying to head and arm throw you. And I think if Lemos takes her back, she's going to finish her in the grappling realm. So for me, it's hard to see Amanda Lemos, who we know potentially has cardio deficiencies, who we know has been prone to getting finished herself. How could she ever be minus 600 or minus 700, but less than 50% to finish inside the distance? Part of the reason she's so good is because she is so physically overwhelming. She carries so much finishing upside, both in her hands and her grappling. So to me, plus 130 is just kind of outrageous. I don't love playing inside the distance lines on fights like this necessarily, but I don't know. Ruiz is a tough girl, but she's just massively outgunned both skill and physicality wise in this fight. So it's Lemos inside the distance for me. I think she makes a strong play on DraftKings. Clearly minus 700. It's hard not to be a strong play on DK, but I actually think she has more finishing upside than the current market suggests. So that's my breakdown for this fight. John, do you have anything you want to add about Lemos versus Ruiz?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. I think Amanda Lemos is a absolute badass. I think she's a killer. I would take her over multiple fighters inside the top 10. I think she legit is top 5 talent in this division. And, so for starters, I played her inside the distance as well. Double chance on FanDuel by KO or submission at plus 115. It's already down to minus 105. But I echo your thoughts here. I just think there's really you can't explain the justification to me for saying she's a coin flip to finish Ruiz in this fight. It makes no sense to me. And the only thing I'll say, I actually think the cardio thing is a little bit overblown. The Leslie Smith fight, no doubt she gassed out super hard, super early in that fight, but it's kind of funny. She actually retired. And I know some people might not know this. She actually retired prior to coming to UFC, couldn't find a fight, was struggling to make ends meet, ended up retiring from fighting and didn't hear anything for 4 months, didn't train for 4 months. She stopped going to the gym and then got the call from the UFC up 2 weight classes against Leslie Smith. So she said she took it. It was either that or never fight again. She took it even not going to the gym for 4 months and training. So she knew she was going to gas out heavy. So really you can kind of throw that fight out the window. She's really an undefeated fighter in my book, because you run that fight back. And I think even though she fights at 115 now, I would favor her over Leslie Smith if she had a full camp. So, and at 115, she's just super big, super powerful. You mentioned it. Now you're going up against somebody you mentioned the Souza fight. I would take Souza over Ruiz, and Souza didn't even look like that fight didn't even look like it should have been sanctioned. It wasn't even remotely close. And Souza, I don't have it pulled up, but I'm pretty sure she's never been finished, right? I think all of her losses up to that point were by decision.
Souza's historically been a super tough fighter. She in Invicta, I think she was more Invicta and UFC combined, because obviously she had some success there. She was 14-2 and then never been finished before, I want to say. I'll double check that as you're talking, but Souza is an extremely tough fighter to look good against because of her style, and Lemos did it with ease.
Oh, with ease. It wasn't even remotely close. She looked like she was minus 1,000 in that spot. It's just, she's so you hit on the biggest thing is like the physicality, the power, how she's dangerous on the feet with her power, but also in the grappling realm. And we know Ruiz is going to look for her only move like that. That's great that it worked against Cheyenne Bays, who's super green, maybe is talented in the future. But, you know, that type of stuff is not going to work against a fighter that actually knows what they're doing and who's so much stronger and so much more powerful, so much more dangerous. So I think I'm right there with you. I think Lemos rolls in this spot. I think she gets the finish. Played her inside the distance. I think she's a strong play on DraftKings as well, because I think the finish likely comes early. So yeah, I think we're both on the same page there.
Yeah, I just double checked. Souza had never been finished prior to that fight, and you mentioned like it shouldn't have been sanctioned. Like it looked like
she dropped her twice. Like it was child's play. It wasn't even close.
And it's like the pity stoppage sort of where it was like Souza just like didn't want to be there type of deal. Lemos, she's just too physical, too strong here, I think, to not find a finish at some point against Ruiz, who really is a one-trick pony, like you mentioned. So we're both high on Lemos. We both think she gets it done inside the distance. It'll be interesting how much ownership she garners, right? Because she is a massive favorite, but at the same time, an underdog in most spots to finish inside the distance. And as a three-round ceiling, I should say, opposed to Islam Makhachev, who's a bigger favorite, which is rare. We don't usually see two -700 favorites. Makhachev is a bigger favorite in the main event and only $100 more. I think it's interesting kind of how that ownership will be leveraged, especially if you consider that Lemos probably has more upside to win in rounds 1, 2, and 3 than Islam does to kind of finish at any point. So that's an interesting discussion. We'll get to it later. Let's move on to our next fight here. Now that we're doing the whole show for free, I honestly haven't been Googling like what starts the main card, but I'm pretty sure we're getting close to the end of the prelims. We got Daniel Rodriguez -325 against Preston Parsons, comes back +265 in his debut for Parsons, UFC debut, I should say. DraftKings prices, we got Rodriguez D-Rod 8.8K, Parsons $7.4 thousand. John, I'll let you go first here. What do you make of Preston Parsons on the regional scene? You know, he's fought some decent guys, most notably a knockout loss to Mike Perry. Gets the call here to fight D-Rod. I believe this fight was made on short notice. We had a lot of fights fall off of this card, but this is one that was recently added. So UFC debut for Preston Parsons against Daniel Rodriguez, who I think both of us think is a pretty decent fighter. So what do you make of this one, John?
Yeah, he's fought some decent guys, but it's like the decent guys that he fought, he lost to, and the guys that he's beating are pretty bad. Like he doesn't have many quality wins. He is a pretty decent grappler. He definitely knows what he's doing in the grappling realm, but I mean, this is a super tough spot to put him in. Short notice, UFC debut, and he's just a limited fighter in general. Like on the feet, Daniel Rodriguez, good boxer, more powerful, more durable, probably better cardio. We don't really know the cardio of Parsons just because we haven't seen it. Like he's finishing most of his guys by first round submission. All 9 of his wins have come by submission, 8 of those inside the first round. He's only ever had 2 fights in his career reach the second round, and none of them have reached the third round. So it's not that we know he has bad cardio, because we don't know. And he hasn't really looked super tired in any of his fights, but we haven't seen it tested. So it's just more of a question mark to me. Whereas Rodriguez, he's looked a little bit tired at times late in rounds, but that's after throwing like 250 strikes. Like the dude is a volume machine. And I think he's just going to box the face off of Parsons for as long as this lasts. And Rodriguez isn't even a terrible grappler either. Like I think he's like a 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu purple belt, I want to say. But he's not even a bad grappler. So Parsons just has a really limited path to victory here. I think he has to take him down. I think he has to submit him early. And I just don't even think that that's all that likely here. So yeah, I think Rodriguez, has one of the better inside distance lines on the slate, and I think it's warranted here. But going back to our earlier conversation, like, even though I kind of think Parsons is a shit play, all these underdogs are kind of shit plays. It's kind of like pick your poison. So for somebody that is going to be running 10 or more lineups, he's another underdog, even though he almost always loses in this spot. Theoretically, in a win, his win has a ton of upside because it comes with wrestling, it comes with grappling, and it probably comes with an early finish. So even though I think he's a bad play, I think Rodriguez knocks him out. If I were playing 10 or more lineups in the large field GPPs, I would get some exposure to him.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add here. Preston Parsons, I think, is decent. He's only 26, so there's room for him to get better. He's clearly a flawed fighter in the sense that he's not very process driven, right? Like you mentioned, he's a good grappler, but a lot of his grappling isn't top control. It's more so really selling out for submissions. I was watching some tape on him, like I think it was 2 fights ago. I have this horrible habit of not writing down notes when I watch tape on guys who are making their debuts. So I can't, all the fights blend together in my head. So I can't ever remember exactly who the highlight was against. But I believe it was 2 fights ago where Parsons is on top. He has the back mount on the ground, and he falls over the top trying to get an armbar. He eventually finishes it, but he essentially takes himself from the back, which is one of the most dominant positions in MMA grappling, to in his own full guard. He has his back on the ground, and it's just not very process driven. So against lower level guys, like, yeah, he can submit them. He's clearly a physically strong guy. His striking, I mean, it is very defensively irresponsible, I would say. And look, Daniel Rodriguez lands a shit ton of strikes. He lands almost 8 strikes per minute. I know a lot of that came from the Gabe Green fight where the guy just wouldn't go away. There's a case to be made. Parsons is a powerful kid, has submission upside. Rodriguez gets hit a ton. I will say that's kind of the one knock on him. But I really just think he's going to be like just bouncing this kid's brain around with the jab. I mean, Rodriguez's boxing is extremely crisp for MMA, and Parsons is really a submission-only guy. I mean, all of his wins have come via submission, and that's not to say that he's kind of a one-trick pony because he is a decent grappler. Just he's going to need to get D-Rod down. He has to parlay getting D-Rod down, getting a takedown, getting into a position to get a submission, and then finishing the submission, all while not getting beat up on the feet by a guy who's beating up way higher level guys standing. So I think D-Rod could honestly be a bigger favorite. The only reason I'm not looking to lay chalk in this situation is because Rodriguez gets hit a lot and he's not super tested off his back. He's done a decent job. I think Means took him down and Rodriguez got up. So he's not a helpless grappler, but I think Parsons has somewhat of a chance to get some success early in the fight, but I really think Rodriguez should kind of be able to do whatever he wants in the striking realm. So him as a 3-1 favorite, 3.5-1 favorite really seems about right to me, if not short. So let's move on to the main card here. We got Gabriel Benitez minus 175 against Billy Quarantillo. He's plus 150, 7.7K for Billy Q. This is my biggest bet on the card. I have a max bet on Gabriel Benitez. I have the max bet at plus 115. BetMGM put that out there. It was out there for like 2 days, and they let me get down like a lot of money on it. So basically what I did is I took as much as they would let me get on Benitez, which was it was certainly more than I was comfortable getting down in a fight. And I took some Billy Q at like plus 195 when it kind of this line moved, right? Benitez is minus 175 or minus 160 now, where depending where you're looking, opens plus 115. He got all the way out to minus 200. I took some Billy Q at that price just because I had an uncomfortable amount of exposure. But I'm still a massive Gabriel Benitez guy come this weekend. When you look at this matchup, Billy Q is someone who I generally like him, right? Like he has great cardio. He fights at a rapid pace and his wrestling is mediocre and enough to win him minutes at points. But I mean, he blocks punches with his face. His striking is not very good. I mean, Gavin Tucker was absolutely piecing him up. And Gabriel Benitez is a great counter striker. His leg kicks are extremely hard. I just think this is one of those fights where you can look at all the numbers in the world you want of the output from Billy Q. And I'm in no means a statistics hater. I think analytics are extremely important in sports like MMA. But it's like empty volume for Billy Q. He just moves forward, but for every shot he lands, he takes one back. Benitez is probably not going to get hit that much here. He throws back extremely hard, and I really think he probably knocks out Billy Q in this spot. It's just the striking discrepancy in terms of the raw power and skill level is will be extremely evident here. So could I see Billy Q getting a takedown here? Probably. Could I see him, putting up a rapid pace and getting this to a decision? I could see that as well. I just think Benitez is the way better fighter, and he was an underdog and really deserves to be closer to minus 175. So I maxed that. It's just a terrible number, and I'm happy with my position where it lies now. But John, talk to me a little bit more about the current market. Those who are in the FTN Bets tracker, which is now free for everyone. Everyone saw the Benitez play. Hopefully a lot of people are holding on to plus 115 tickets. But if you were unable to do so, how would you approach the fight now at current market? And then also within the DFS realm, these are two guys in the mid-range. We've kind of mentioned stars and scrubs style week. What are you doing with this fight kind of from a betting and DFS perspective?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You say, because of your bet, you'll be a big Benitez fan this weekend, but you're just a big Benitez fan in general. I always say death taxes and Shiffy on Gabriel Benitez. But I definitely agree with you here. Like, he's clearly the more polished striker. Like, I think the striking isn't even really all that close here. He's much more technical. I think he's more powerful. And like you, I think his finishing upside is a little bit more than the market suggests in this spot. I know Billy Q's historically very durable, and that's pretty much the only reason why I didn't play Benitez to finish here. Just because maybe Billy Q just stays alive and gets the shit kicked out of him for 15 minutes. But like you said, I mean, the leg kicks are going to be there all day long, especially Billy continuously moving forward. I think he's going to have to eat a ton of really hard leg kicks from Benitez. I think Benitez is a better boxer as well. It's just like, how does Billy win in this spot? He really just has to, weather the early storm. But then even after that, it's like Benitez has decent cardio. You're relying on Billy to just like out hustle, out heart Benitez. Like, that can only go so far, especially when you're just outgunned in almost every single facet. And like, theoretically, he could land takedowns here, but it's not like you said, it's not like he's this great technical wrestler. Like, he typically gets guys down because they're tired, and his relentless pace, like, he can take them down once they're tired. Like, he's not like by any means a technical wrestler. And I don't think that Benitez was really at that much of a threat to be taken down in this spot. I think Benitez probably rolls here. To answer your question, though, I think it's probably lined about right where it's at right now. I don't have a play on it. In terms of DraftKings, I do prefer Benitez for two reasons. One, because like I said earlier, I think I'm with you in that I think his finishing upside is more than the market suggests. But the other reason, just from like a game theory standpoint, is I kind of think Billy Q might be one of the heaviest owned underdog plays this week. Anyone under 8K, just because he's a guy that a lot of people like in general. Theoretically, could have wrestling upside here, good cardio. So even though he got exposed against Gavin Tucker his last time out, I could see him being a popular play this week. Whereas Benitez, who's in that mid-range, like you said, if we're trying to pay up for all those 9K guys and above, like people, and Billy Q is going to be popular anyway, Benitez is kind of going to be that forgotten guy in the mid-range. So that gives me a little bit of interest here, especially like I think his last 2 wins have come in the first round, like a finish in the first round. Like, if that happens at his price and what I think his ownership will be, you will need to have him to take down the big tournament. So just from a game theory perspective, I think he's a better play than the market thinks.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you say that I'm always on Benitez, because I think I only bet him against Janes, but he's been in a couple spots.
Omar Morales.
Did I bet him against Morales too, and he lost in that spot?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't bet him against Yusuf though, and I didn't bet him against Van Denai. But I think he's had like 3 fights canceled. I'll have to pull up Topology while we're talking about the next fight, but it's basically one of those things. Right?
Jonathan Pierce was one.
Yeah, I had
that was canceled. You had a okay. I thought you had a bet
under in that fight. I like Jonathan Pierce, JSP.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
But it's just one of those things. Like, I feel we've talked about the guy so much, but in terms of like actual dollars I've gotten down on him, it's actually not that many. But I definitely have a lot of dollars down on him this weekend. So hopefully he comes through. I still think there's a little bit of value at -155. That's just kind of my last point on the fight. I mentioned it got all the way out to -200. I took a little Billy Q at that price just to take off some of the amount that I had down. But I think that -155, like I would still play. Would I play him for 3 units? No, but I do think that Benitez probably good for a unit at -155. I really think that the striking discrepancy will be massive once this fight gets underway. So let's move on to our second fight of the main card here. We got Rodolfo Vieira, -210, 8.7K against Justin Stoltzfus, +180, 7.5K for the underdog in this spot. look, everyone saw Vieira's last fight against Fluffy Hernandez, came out here, had some early success with the takedowns, faced some resistance in terms of a get-up game, and just, I mean, death gas, like, before round one was over. Like, he was in big trouble. And it's one of those things where he clearly dominated round one, but was still an underdog going into round two on the live lines, because it was so clear that he was just in a complete world of hurt. We were talking off air, John and I were, before we went live, about how Chris Moutinho's corners should have thrown in the towel, or could have thrown in the towel last week, and how it should probably happen more often in MMA. Like, Rodolfo Vieira had taken not that much damage, but he was just drawing so dead to win the fight. That, to me, felt like a spot, not where the corner would throw in the towel, but as a bettor, it was so obvious to everyone, to the point where, like, live lines weren't even open at points in between that first and second round for Vieira, because it was so clear that he's gassed out. I mean, he couldn't bring his hands up to defend his face from strikes. He just ended up eating shots and then just trying to shoot takedowns on Fluffy. And to Hernandez's credit, he got the submission win. I think we all were not expecting that. And then Stoltzfus, on the other hand, I don't really think he's that good, to be honest. He got a contract off Contender Series where he won by a KO slam, where the other guy broke his arm, one of Felder's training partners. And he just didn't look great up to that point. And then in his UFC debut, got controlled for like 10 minutes against Dawkins, who I think Dawkins is pretty good, but it's hard for me not to see scenarios where Vieira takes him down early in this fight. That said, how could I bet Vieira at a 2-1 price tag if he can't win after the 6th or 7th minute of the fight? You know what I mean, John? So that's kind of my thoughts here. I have no action on it. At first, I thought the under would be decent. And now that I think about it, I think the under mostly just is Vieira's win, his win path, because I think that Stoltzfus probably needs to survive a pretty hellish early storm and then come back in the last 7.5 minutes. So maybe a live bet on Stoltzfus after round one. I'm sure the books have kind of picked up on it a little bit, because it was just a really obvious kind of crazy, not even an outlier in the sense that it wouldn't happen again with Vieira, because he is massive for the weight class, carries a ton of muscle. It was an outlier in terms of watching MMA in general. It is rare that you see a professional fighter, especially one who is as credentialed as Rodolfo Vieira, be so clearly out past his depth in the middle of the first round. So it's pass for me. I think he's interesting on DraftKings, Vieira is, because he has upside to win in round one. But at the same time, like, if Stoltzfus survives and Vieira can't pick his hands up to defend his face, it might not take much to get him out of there in the later round. So I think this is a fight you probably want a decent amount of exposure to on DraftKings. John, what do you make of the fight?
Yeah, so first off, I played Vieira by submission in round one at plus 200 for half a unit. So I'll get that out of the way first. And that one's just kind of obvious. Vieira, one of the best credentialed grapplers in the UFC. That's clearly his path to victory. He needs to take him down early, needs to submit him early, and probably does. And plus 200 is a pretty nice number. So it's worth half a unit to me, and that number is still available on FanDuel Sportsbook. Just Stoltzfus, like, he's a decent grappler. He's never been submitted, but he hasn't rolled with anybody near the level of Rodolfo Vieira, the black belt hunter. So I just think it's going to be levels when the fight hits the mat, and Vieira is pretty aggressive in getting the fight to the mat early. And like you said, I don't think Stoltzfus really gives him much resistance there. So that's the way I targeted it. Now, in terms of DraftKings, Vieira is exactly the type of big favorite that you want to fade on DraftKings. Like the last time he fought against Fluffy Hernandez, and this is a strategy I like to use a lot. And there's only some spots where it makes a lot of sense. And fighters like Rodolfo Vieira is one of those. Abdul Al-Hassan is another one that comes to mind. Like, they have very narrow paths to victory. And if they don't meet those paths to victory, if they don't hit their win condition, they're almost never going to win. And so that's why and the other factor is they're always chalk. Like, they're always the most popular fighters on the slate. So it's just like a recipe for, you're going to get massive leverage if this one thing doesn't happen. So that's the way I like to build in those situations. So I actually had, like, going back to that Fluffy Hernandez fight, on that slate, I had like 70% Vieira. He's one of my highest owned fighters. And on the flip side, I had Anthony Hernandez in like my highest dollar tournament for that exact reason, because more than likely Vieira submits him in round one. But if he doesn't, we know he's always had a bad gas tank. That it ended up being the worst it's ever been in that fight, but he's never had a good gas tank. He always gasses after one round. And he's super hittable on the feet. Even in his other fight, I forget who he was fighting, where he had a big mouse on his orbital and he had to finish it because it was going to be a doctor stoppage if he didn't, and he got the submission victory. But it's like, he has flaws. Yes, he's an excellent grappler, but he gets hit a ton on the feet, super big, tough weight cut, bad cardio. Like, yes, he's very, very good at that one thing, but if that one thing doesn't happen, then he's almost drawing dead. So those are situations where you're going to get massive leverage because fighters like that, for whatever reason, are just always popular. So that's why I bring up that strategy. And I actually ended up, that was the last tournament that I won, was that card. And because I can't play now, I have to live in the glory days of when I could actually play. But that was the last tournament I won using that exact strategy. And I think this card sets up similarly, not just this fight, but there's multiple fighters that are like that. But him specifically, where you can take that approach where, yes, you can still be overweight on him. And if he gets that first round sub, good, you're looking good. But on the flip side, get some Stoltz fists. Even though he sucks and he probably gets submitted in the first round here, if the same thing happens, would we be all that surprised? Absolutely not. So, and then he'll probably get a second round or third round finish, and you probably need him at his price. So I know I spent a lot of time on that, but I just think that's like a super obvious strategy with Vieira and other fighters like him in general that have such a limited skill set and a limited path to victory, where it makes a lot of sense, if they're going to be popular, to take sort of a high variance approach and a high leverage approach with the other side of those fights.
Yeah, I think that's just really good macro. I know you said it only applies to some fighters, but that's just like pretty good macro strategy in terms of MMA DFS. The one pushback I'll have here is that Veer's only minus 210, and I say only because we have those massive favorites on this card. So 8.7K, it's not like in previous Vieira fights where he's like 9.3K and you're getting his opponent at the stone min. But I do think it makes sense. Like, Vieira is very someone who, we don't think of him as kill or be killed, but the fact of the matter is, if he can't get a kill, right? Like, if he can't go out there and just cut through someone on the ground in the first round, he's in massive trouble after that. And there's a track record of that. You mentioned, I think you did a great job. I kind of surpassed the fact that, like, yeah, it was kind of an outlier in terms of like someone gassing out that bad, but we knew going into the fight, like, Vieira does not have good cardio. He's not like a super well-rounded guy. He's massively jacked. He's a world-class grappler. But other than that, like, in terms of MMA, I mean, we are talking about mixed martial arts. This guy is in trouble if he doesn't hit his kind of optimal path to victory. So I really enjoyed that conversation. I think it's important just to remember throughout all slates that there are guys like that, and that's a good way to profit off of them, whether or not they succeed or fail, because you kind of cover both bases. Let's move on to the featured bout of the evening. We got Mateus Gamrot minus 225 against Jeremy Stephens plus 180. Gamrot, $8,600 coming off of his first UFC finish, I should say, against Scott Holtzman, against Jeremy Stephens, who's plus 180, 7.6K for Stephens, who's moving up to 155 pounds for this fight. He also fought, he was supposed to fight Jakar Close, but that fight got canceled. So I do believe this is his first fight at 155, at least in terms of his recent schedule. I know I have a pretty strong take on this fight, John, but I'm curious what you think, because we saw Gamrot open minus 245-ish. That line blew out a little bit closer to minus 275, but there's been a kind of a steady stream of Jeremy Stephens money rolling in throughout the last week or 10 days or so. So I'm curious, what do you make of this fight between Gamrot and Jeremy Stephens?
Yeah, it seems like Stephens is, he's such a popular fighter, even though he's not like the best fighter. So it seems like the public's kind of always on Stephens, and he's almost always, like, especially recently, almost always lined as a dog. He was a dog against Calvin Kattar, dog against Yair Rodriguez. Like, he's just always a popular underdog that the public likes to gravitate to. He's a fiery guy. I like his personality. Talks some smack. Obviously, the Drakkar Close thing has been in the news lately, or the articles and stuff, because of what happened there. So he's a guy that just generates a lot of attention. But in terms of the matchup, I think he has a striking advantage. I don't think it's like super, super wide there, but I do think he is the better technical striker. I think he's probably a little bit more powerful, but when it comes to durability, that's where it starts to get a little bit dicey. But the biggest thing for me in this matchup is I think Gamrot is just going to land takedowns at will. Jeremy Stephens has never had good takedown defense. I think he's around 65% in the UFC. But anytime he faces like a decent wrestler, he's going to be taken down. And in this spot, Gamrot, I think he's as good as you do, and I'll let you get into that, but I don't think he's bad at all. And I do think he's a good wrestler. And I think that's what it comes down to for me in this matchup is he's going to be able to land multiple takedowns here. I think he's going to bank some control time. I just think he's a better minute winner. I think Stephens is probably drawing dead to a knockout. And I don't even know how likely that is. I don't think it's impossible by any means, but I think more than likely he spends a lot of time on his back here. So I like Gamrot. And just real quick, this is kind of a similar thing with the Benitez. Is like, well, we think Stephens is going to be a popular underdog, and Gamrot might be in that mid to upper mid range of salary. He might get lost in the shuffle there as a guy who has clear wrestling upside, gonna bank some control time in a win. So I think he's a pretty decent DraftKings play. But let me hear your thoughts. I know you have a stronger take than me, so let's hear it.
Yeah, so I'm on Gamrot here. I actually have a significantly worse number than the current market. I bet him at minus 245 for a unit. So I'm kind of considering how much I want to add and at what point I want to add. Because I think that Gamrot by decision is up there like plus 200. I might take a poke at that. But I also might just play him straight at like minus 185, minus 190 if it gets to that point for another half unit or so. I really like Mateusz Gamrot. I think he's a top 10 talent in this division, and I know this division is super stacked, but he's just a super well-rounded fighter who pushes a decent pace. His striking in terms of volume is there for sure. He showed some power against Holtzman, but he mixes in his wrestling and his takedowns beautifully with the striking. He has that super the super low single leg that he goes to consistently, and he's just a nightmare matchup, especially for guys like Stephens who don't have great takedown defense, where he can compete on the feet and then he takes you down with that low single leg. I will say he's not a great top control grappler. Like, I don't think he's going to sit on top of Stephens for 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes here, but I do think he can land like 6 or 7 takedowns. And then it gets to the point where like Stephens is thinking about the takedown and doesn't have that much success on the feet. I think Stephens needs a finish via knockout in order to win the fight. He's capable of it. He has a ton of knockdowns, but also Jeremy Stephens has the most losses in UFC history. Like, you can go look at this guy and there's a clear blueprint to beat him. And I think Gamrot does that kind of naturally. He doesn't need to adapt his game to get to that point. And I think he's a great play on DraftKings because he will land those takedowns. It's kind of one of those plays where he's going to land takedowns, and I think Stephens has a good shot to get up. And then Gamrot just gets another 5 points for taking him down. And I know DraftKings has kind of amended their scoring so that just staying in top position gets you points throughout the entirety of a fight. It used to be back in the day where Merab would take someone down and you would hope they get up. So Merab takes them down again because he was only getting 5 points for the takedown and then 3 points if he was able to pass guard. Now there's that 0.03 per control time, or 0.03 DraftKings points per control time. But for Gamrot, like, Stephens might just get up after a minute, and then Gamrot takes him down again. So I think Gamrot kind of blows him out in this spot. I think the striking is competitive. Stephens has a power advantage for sure. But you mentioned 65% takedown defense against everybody who goes in there looking to take him down. He gets taken down. The blueprint is out there. And I really like Gamrot. I think he's a really talented fighter. So I think he goes out there, gets the victory. And I think the market love for Stephens is kind of out of control. And I might just kind of be the market resistance to that and add another half unit here on my guy Gamrot. So that's enough on the featured bout. We got 2 more fights left. Let's move on to the co-main here. I'll be short. We got Miesha Tate minus 145 against Marion Renault plus 125. Tate, $8,200. Renault is $8K on DraftKings. I mean, I 2 weeks ago, I kind of thought that, like, hey, maybe I'll play Miesha in this spot. But I just don't know how anyone could, like, have money on this fight. Like, the more I looked into it, like, Miesha Tate hasn't fought in almost 5 years, like 4.5 years, more than 4.5, less than 5. She last fought in November of 2016. And she was kind of getting out muscled by Raquel Pennington at that point. And I mean, Pennington is good. Pennington put on a great performance against Renault recently, where she had a 10-8 round in there. But Renault is 44 years old. Like, this is outwardly and publicly her last fight. She's lost 4 in a row. And I mean, they've been to decent competition, and Renault is a decent grappler in her own right and is super tough and durable, but she's never been finished. She's 44. Like, I don't bet on 44-year-old fighters. I'm not doing that. And with Miesha Tate, I mean, her game was kind of predicated on like being a decent wrestler at the early stages of women's MMA, and the game has evolved a lot since she's gone. So I don't buy like the whole like Miesha Tate is coming back and will have a chance to compete for the title. I mean, it's not exactly the most talent-filled division that she's coming back to fight in at 135 pounds, but I think Miesha is probably not as good as she used to be, and I think Renault is like ready to be done fighting and a 44-year-old gym teacher, and that's what she wants to do with the rest of her life. So I'm not betting on the fight. I struggle to see how someone can have confidence. But John, maybe you shut me up. Do you have any action on this fight, or is it one that you kind of feel similarly is just an easier pass?
No, I mean, I think this fight was around a pick 'em at some point. I think if you got it there, then I'd be tempted into a Miesha Tate play at that price, but at minus 145, I'm perfectly comfortable passing just because there's just way too many question marks for me. 5-year layoff, coming. It's not even like she was all that dominant, her last couple fights anyway. Like, and obviously things have changed drastically since then as well. But it's like this matchup specifically is a very winnable matchup for her, because we know Miesha is probably going to look to wrestle here, and Marion Renault is going to give them up. So that's really what it comes down to me is like, I'm pretty confident she lands multiple takedowns here. Whatever else happens in the fight, I probably don't really have a clue. I think it plays out pretty competitively, but give me the fighter that I'm pretty confident lands a couple takedowns and probably gets the decision win. So I think Miesha Tate gets the job done. In terms of DraftKings, it just comes down to how many takedowns you think she lands, or how much control time she banks. So she's actually an interesting play on DraftKings, just because I don't think she's going to be that popular. And she's another one with clear wrestling, grappling, and control time upside to where she could be a decent play in the mid-range. So I would get exposure to Miesha Tate on the slate. All the concerns aside, it's not a super confident lean, but I definitely prefer her to Renault for this fight.
Yeah,
you're muted.
I think that's fair. It's just I don't have too strong. I'm not muted. I just think I lagged out for a second. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, sweet. So let's move on to the main event. We got Islam Makhachev. He's a potentially prohibitive, depending on what you think of the price, favorite. Minus 610 against Thiago Moises, who comes back plus 455. That Makhachev price has kind of been bouncing between minus 550 and minus 700. Even I've seen it as high as 800 for moments of time throughout the week. Moises, $6,800 is an underdog on DK. Makhachev, obviously our most expensive fighter on DraftKings slate. He's $9,400, has that 5-round floor. I'll be pretty quick with this fight. Like, I think I have a bet. I bet Makhachev to win in rounds 4 or 5 or by decision at minus 145 on points bet earlier. I actually think it's a pretty significant edge. He has 8 UFC wins. 4 of them have come inside the distance. 4 of them via decision. He's a guy who a lot of people make the comparison to Makhachev and Khabib, and I think it's an easy comparison to make. In terms of how they fight on the ground, I think it's slightly different. Khabib is much more ground and pound based, where he's looking to posture up and put like real damage on his opponents. And Makhachev, a lot of people think he's more like lay and pray, but I actually think he's decently aggressive going for submissions. The issue is Thiago Moises has been around for a decently long time for someone as young as he is. He's getting better, training at a really good gym, and he is a competent grappler to the point where I don't think Makhachev is going to submit him, and he's probably not the type to posture up and land massive ground and pound. So, look, do I think Islam wins pretty easily in this spot? Yeah, he's minus 600, but I do think that Moises is a guy who's never been finished. He's only 26, training at American Top Team. I don't think he's going to get submitted in this spot. So, in my opinion, in order for my bet to lose, like Moises is going to need to pull off a massive upset, and if that happens, props to the kid. And if it doesn't happen, Makhachev is going to have to knock him out or submit him in the first 3 rounds. And I just think that Moises is a durable fighter who is competent, probably a better like pure BJJ player than Makhachev, to the point where he's not going to get submitted unless he's in like a world of trouble. And Makhachev just doesn't really, he glues himself to guys and will hunt submissions when they give their back, but he's not looking to like elbow you in the face over and over again and get you to kind of succumb to super dominant positions. So I played Makhachev rounds 4, 5, or decision, -145. I think it's a pretty decent number, pretty decent edge. But that's my only play on the fight. I think he makes for, obviously, he's an awesome play on DraftKings. I don't really see a path for Moises outside of like, he needs to hit Makhachev hard. He needs to hit him early. He probably needs to put him out, or some sort of guillotine submission on the ground off his back. But Makhachev is just too smart, too good, I think, to get caught in some sort of like guard submission. So I think Islam rolls here, but I don't think it's via finish within the first 15 minutes. John, do you have anything on this fight in our main event this weekend?
Yeah, I don't really have a ton to add here. It's hard to have like a super spicy, strong take when it's just such a massive favorite. And I think it's kind of warranted. I think the line is wide here just because you mentioned Moises is super tough, super durable. He's not going to go away. The cardio, Makhachev seems to have fine cardio, but we've never seen him go 5 rounds. So maybe there's a scenario where, you know, he dominates rounds 1 through 3 and then gasses out, and Moises is still coming forward, swinging heavies, and maybe it gets interesting there. But I'm just, you know, I'm throwing it out there. I don't think that's going to happen. But I guess that's like his path to victory, or like you said, just landing a heavy shot early. I do think Moises is the better striker here. It's just the thing is, I don't think it plays out much on the feet. I think Makhachev, he's insanely good at closing the distance. Best wrestler that Moises has ever faced. And we saw Moises against Beneil Dariush gave up multiple takedowns, gave up like 13 minutes of control time. And so I think that it's going to be a similar path for Makhachev here. I think he's going to rinse and repeat takedowns, bank a ton of control time, which makes him one of the best plays on DraftKings on the entire slate. The only thing I'll say, because everybody's just like, you know, on their knees for Makhachev, saying he's the future champ or whatever, like, let's pump the fucking brakes on that. Like, you're going to have to show me a little bit more for somebody that, you know, I think has a lot of holes, especially in the striking realm. You know, give me, I'll take Dustin Poirier over him. I'll take Beneil Dariush over him. I'll even take Michael Chandler probably over him. And I know people probably get out the pitchforks for that take. But yeah, give me Michael Chandler over Islam Makhachev. But we'll see. I just think everybody's just like, you know, having their own circle party, you know, saying that Makhachev's a future champ and all that. Like, we saw how that looked for Ronnie Barcelos. Like, come on.
Yeah, but I mean, Ronnie Barcelos he's no Islam Makhachev. I mean, I'm not.
No, he's not. But I just mean, like, that was, you know, the sentiment for Ronnie Barcelos. Everybody, like, give him a real test. He's going to be a future champ and all that.
Yeah,
like,
I see what you're saying. But like, Barcelos is older, is like a little bit gassy. I mean, look, this is a big spot for Makhachev, despite being a massive favorite. Like, we haven't seen him extended. But the kid's 29, has 20 pro fights, and his one loss is like a fluke KO. And he hasn't beaten anyone great in the UFC, but like, he nullified Drew Dober. I'd take him over Dustin tomorrow. Beneil Dariush is a pretty good fight. The way you said that, like, I think Beneil would be a good fight.
I would max bet Beneil. I would.
I mean, it depends on the number, obviously, but like,
yeah, I'm just assuming the respect that Makhachev gets, like, that you'll get a good number on any of those guys. So that obviously is factoring into my opinion. But
yeah, I don't know. I have to think about how I line the fights. There's no way I'm making Islam an underdog to Dustin Poirier, though. I mean, Charles Oliveira is going to go out there and like choke out Dustin in like 4 minutes. It's gonna be wonderful. We're going to be at plus 180 on it. I'm a Dustin fan.
Would you take Oliveira over Makhachev? I think that one's interesting.
Probably. He's a much cleaner striker and like a guy who like is one of the few fighters who you legitimately like don't really want to be in his guard. I know Kevin Lee had like a few minutes of success there, but you have to like really mind your P's and Q's against Oliveira because he's extremely dangerous off his back. And I think he's just a cleaner striker. Poirier is a pretty decent offensive grappler, but still he pulls like the guillotine every time he tries to get taken down. I think he'd end up on his back for like super long periods of time there. But Makhachev has a ways to go in terms of getting those fights. I think the betting market, if they happen tomorrow, would certainly respect the guy for his potential. But in terms of the pedigree, he certainly isn't at the top yet. However, I think we both think he clearly moves one step closer to that with his first main event victory this weekend. I don't have anything else to add. That's all 11 fights for UFC Vegas 31. John, if you have anything to add about our conversation regarding Makhachev, the main event, any of the other 10 fights on the card, feel free to do so. And if not, take us out.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that I guess I'll spend the rest of the week looking over my shoulder because I know the Makhachev hive is going to come for me after those comments. But yeah, I think that was a good breakdown. 11 fights, guys. Feel free to get a little different. Like we said, you're going to have to target some of these sketchy underdogs. Even if we don't think they're going to win, maybe one of these guys breaks the slate. Last week with the pay-per-view, Gilbert Burns was the only underdog that won. And I don't even think he was optimal. I think like Jessica I was or something like that. So just keep that in mind. Things can get a little weird with these type of slates. But we'll be in Discord. We have all our stuff up at ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com. That's all I got, guys. I'm Jon Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck. And we will see you guys next time.